Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something that is universally terrifying, but honestly, it's deeply fascinating. We're exploring the science of scares. Specifically, we're going to examine why our own minds seem totally hardwired to invent terrifying illusions the exact moment the lights go out. We're going to look at the history, the folklore, and finally, the hard cognitive science behind why humans have always feared the dark, and more specifically, why we are so terrified of what might be looking back at us. Think back to when you were a kid. Be honest, did you ever dare to go into a pitch-black bathroom, stand right in front of the mirror, and play a game like Bloody Mary? I mean, it's a sleepover staple, right? A dare passed down through generations. But why do we actually do it? Why is there this almost instinctual, gut-level dread of staring into a reflective surface when the lights are low? Well, take a look at this chilling description from the folklore surrounding the Bloody Mary ritual. Depending on which version of the legend you hear, participants might endure the apparition screaming at them, cursing them, or, well, much worse. It perfectly captures that deep-rooted cultural fear we have of mirrors. We really treat them not just as glass, but as unpredictable gateways. Section 1. The Haunted Looking Glass, Rituals and Superstitions. For centuries, mirrors have been viewed with some serious suspicion. People treated them as portals to other dimensions, predictors of the future, and even windows into the afterlife. And that Bloody Mary game actually traces its roots back to these terrifying historical divination rituals. Imagine this. Young women would walk backward up a darkened staircase, holding absolutely nothing but a candle and a hand mirror, just hoping to catch a glimpse of their future husband's face over their shoulder. But there was a massive catch. There was a very real risk that instead of a suitor, they'd see a skull or the face of the Grim Reaper, which literally meant they were destined to die before ever getting married. Yikes. And these fears were incredibly pervasive across history. The ancient Romans, they believed mirrors literally reflected the human soul, and misusing them meant your soul could actually be lost. Then you have the Victorians, who were completely obsessed with spiritualism. They would heavily drape black cloth over mirrors in a house where someone had died. Why? So the deceased wouldn't get confused and accidentally pass into the mirror instead of the afterlife. Oh, and add to this the fact that early mirrors were backed with silver, which oxidized and turned black and murky over time. So picture a dark, blotchy piece of glass reflecting a flickering candle. Honestly, it was the absolute perfect recipe for ghost stories. Section 2. The Myrtles Plantation Mirror, Louisiana's Cursed Relic. Which brings us to a really specific historical example. We're looking at the Myrtles Plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana, widely known as one of America's most haunted homes. Its most infamous artifact is this grand, famously cursed parlor mirror. Visitors and staff out there report seeing actual physical manifestations on the glass. Specifically, eerie handprints and mysterious drip marks that seem to come from inside the mirror itself. The legend says it's impossible to clean, and get this, even when the glass has been completely replaced, these strange smudges and marks somehow reappear, making it look as though trapped spirits are actively pressing forward from the other side. But notice the fascinating juxtaposition here between the folklore and the actual facts. The myth says an enslaved girl named Chloe baked a poisoned oleander cake as revenge, killing the Woodruff family, right? And then their souls were supposedly trapped in the mirror because those Victorian mourning cloths weren't draped properly. However, the historical record tells a much different, though equally tragic story. The family actually died of yellow fever, which was a brutal, very common disease in the 1800s, and their deaths were spaced years apart. But this brilliantly illustrates how we human beings prefer a neat, narrative story of a curse-trapping mirror over the random, senseless tragedy of disease. Section 3. Faces in the Floorboards, the Belmez Mystery. Okay, let's shift our focus to a different, but equally eerie physical haunting. Because mirrors aren't the only places we project our fears, which is pretty evident in the bizarre 1971 case of the Belmez faces in Spain. So in this sleepy and illusion town, Maria Gomez's camera discovered a human face forming literally right in the concrete floor of her kitchen. Terrified, the family actually took a pickaxe to the floor and cemented over it. Problem solved, right? Wrong. New faces returned, and not just vague shapes. We're talking vivid expressions of anguish, sorrow, and agonizing pain. The house became an absolute sensation overnight. And naturally, people were completely desperate to explain the unexplainable here. Some folks claimed the house was built over a 13th century cemetery, and these were restless spirits pushing through. Parapsychologists came in and suggested thoughtography, basically arguing that Maria was unconsciously projecting her own emotional distress right onto the floor using psychic energy. Skeptics, on the other hand, were convinced it was a highly sophisticated hoax using chemicals like silver nitrate and paint. But do you notice the theme here? Whether it's a mirror in Louisiana or a concrete floor in Spain, we are desperate to find a cause for the faces we see in the dark. Section 4. The science of scares. Turning on the lights. So let's leave the spooky campfire stories behind for a second and pivot to the clinical laboratory. It's time to turn on the lights, so to speak, and see what cognitive science actually has to say about all of this. Okay, let's dive into how researchers test this. Scientists, like those featured in a University of Hertfordshire review, study something called the strange face illusion. On one side, you have the mirror gaze task, or MGT, where a person stares into a mirror. On the other, there's the interpersonal gazing dyad task, or IGDT, where two people simply stare at each other. Both are strictly controlled clinical environments designed to figure out exactly what triggers these visions.
And what they found is absolutely wild. There is an exact environmental and behavioral recipe for creating a ghost. First, you need a dimly lit room, ideally calibrated to 0.8 lux. To put that into perspective, that's basically just the light of a single candle. Second, you must stare continuously at the eyes of the face in front of you. And third, you need to hold that stare for 7 to 10 minutes. If you follow these instructions, the illusions will begin. So it's not actually about the supernatural at all. It is entirely about lighting and visual focus.
Section 5. Mind over mirror. Why we invent monsters. So what is actually happening in our brains when we fulfill this recipe? Why does our own mind conjure up these horrors? Well, the absolutely crucial takeaway is this massive 58% figure you see right here. When completely healthy, non-clinical participants sit down and perform this task, 58% of them experience illusory, new, strange faces. That is more than half. And honestly, this completely normalizes the haunting. If you see a face morph in a mirror in the dark, you aren't crazy, and you certainly aren't cursed. Your brain is just functioning exactly the way a human brain functions under sensory deprivation. And what exactly do they see? The breakdown is super fascinating. 66% of people report seeing huge distortions in facial features. A shocking 48% report seeing monstrous or fantastical faces. And 28% see an unknown person looking back at them. The brain is actively inventing monsters in the dark. It's literally taking a lack of visual information and filling in the gaps with its own, often completely terrifying creations. And cognitive science actually gives us a name for this, pareidolia, or matrixing. This is our brain's desperate evolutionary need to interpret random patterns or low light as familiar facial features. You see, we are hardwired to recognize faces so we can instantly detect threats. So when the lighting is low, like looking into an oxidized Victorian mirror, a smudged piece of glass, or a dark concrete floor, our brain would rather invent a monster out of the visual noise than admit it doesn't know what it's looking at. It's essentially your brain saying, look, I'd rather see a ghost than deal with visual chaos. So we've explored the divination rituals, the curses, and finally, the clinical reality. The science absolutely proves that the monsters aren't in the glass. They are a brilliant, hyperactive survival mechanism built right into our very own minds. So I'll leave you with a challenge. Armed with the clinical recipe of 0.8 lux and 10 minutes of staring, what will you see if you turn off the lights and look in the mirror tonight? Thanks for learning with us.